A phone call. How intrusive.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Well, I guess.
Many unbearable hours later.
I guess what it boils down to is like what my favorite subgenre is, and how could I possibly pick that? Right? Hello? Still there? Works every time. In this week's episode, someone has taken their love for scary movies too far with 1996's Scream, directed by Wes Craven. Let's enter the tape tube. What is up, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Tape Tube, a show where we talk about some of my favorite horror movies in my ever-growing VHS collection. This week, we ask that infamous question: what is your favorite scary movie? With the 1996 hit Scream, directed by Wes Craven, who's been responsible for such movies as Last House on the Left, The Hills Have Eyes, Nightmare on Elm Street, and a movie we're sure to see in a future episode here at the Tape Tube, The People Under the Stairs. And to write this box office hit, we have Kevin Williamson, who's brought us, in my opinion, arguably one of the greatest TV series of all time, Dawson's Creek. This movie was undeniably huge. Lord knows you all remember the blood-pumping, squirting Ghostface masks that were all the rave Halloween 96, 97, etc. moving forward that have probably all gone dry by now. This was seen as the comeback of horror in the 90s after years and years of stale and repetitious sequels from the 80s big dogs. And looking at the box office numbers, it absolutely was. And Hollywood knew what to do then: make a ton of stale and repetitious sequels. And speaking of sequels, Scream has a brand new sequel that came out again this year in 2022 that we definitely aren't trying to ride the SEO coattails of in order to get more exposure. And when I think the world is ready for my full movie reviews once again, I'm sure you'll see it in the Nightmare Fuel future. But let's get to the stars of the film because we have a lot of work to do. We have Neve Campbell, Courtney Cox, David Arquette, Skeet Ulrich, Drew Barrymore, Rose McGowan, Jamie Kennedy, and our favorite Stony Boney, Matthew Lillard. Holy shit, that's a lot of people, but with a cast and crew like that, you really can't lose. And with its premise and approach, this is a made-for-horror fans horror movie. If you've never heard of Scream before, I don't know how, but we're doing you a major solid. And because of this life-changing favor, I think it's worth clicking that like and subscribe button down below. Clearly, you need our help, and let us be your guide through the horror cinema world. But what's this movie about? Well, despite all the promotional art and even this box cover, not Drew Barrymore, as we're about to find out. Roll the film. Scream starts up with the 90s sweetheart Drew Barrymore having a nice relaxing evening at home, making some popcorn and watching scary movies when she's interrupted by a phone call. Turns out to be a wrong number, but he keeps calling again and again. This leads to one of the most famous lines of the movie and also some cheesy third wall ego tripping for our director.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Nightmare on Elm Street.
After a while, things go sour and Drew realizes that this guy is gonna be kind of an issue, as he's now threatening her until he tells her that he's actually in the house. A typical slasher chase scene ensues, and soon we get one of the biggest gut punches to an audience since they found out Halloween 3 wouldn't have Michael Myers. Drew Barrymore is dead in the first 15 minutes of the movie. Deception. The next day, the town of Woodsboro is abuzz with the news of the death of Drew, and the town, including the kids at Woodsboro High, are on edge. Mainly our protagonist, Sydney Prescott. Everyone else seems to be pretty chill about it.
Never alone.
Sydney is pretty down in the dumps because it's the 1-year anniversary of her mom's brutal murder, and nosy reporter Gail Weathers isn't helping, who was around during Sydney's mom's death, slinging around all sorts of rumors. Later on, as the horror gods would demand it, Sydney's dad is going out of town on a business trip for the weekend, leaving her all alone, which sounds great for her horny boyfriend Billy, who just climbs up her bedroom window all willy-nilly whenever he wants. Must have been a 90s thing. This movie is famous for riffing off of itself as a slasher. The killer and the kids in town love horror movies and even took time out of the movie to have one of the characters preach about the numerous rules of horror movies, in which Jamie Kennedy, as the local video store nerd, is all too fluent in. This is now a famous scene and really cements the true feeling of what this movie is set out to do. As the days go on, multiple teenagers are attacked and murdered by this masked maniac who seems to be evolved somehow in the case of Sydney's mom. Who do we look to in this time of need to make us feel safe and protected? None other than Officer Dewey, one of the entire series' most lovable characters who also seems to have a history with everyone, including Miss Weathers. What will Sydney and her friends do to stop this horror movie loving psycho? Hopefully not get stuck in a dog door. Shit. Follow the rules and you should survive with Scream. This franchise has certainly had its ups and downs, but it's hard for me to dispute the impact that the first one had in its genre at the particular time. Movies with Freddy, Jason, and Michael Myers were just becoming stale and repetitive and just kinda goofy and hard to be taken seriously. So Wes Craven took that idea, followed the rules that we see in all of those films, and kinda made it the main idea for this one. And it worked. And as good of a thing as this was in its particular time, it brought some bad with it too. This was kind of the final nail in the coffin for the slasher subgenre, as every single slasher movie that came out, years to come following, just kind of copied Scream. For all these reasons and more, Scream is a perfect fit for us here at the Tape Tomb. Here's some facts about Scream. The party scene at the end of the film runs for 42 minutes long. It was shot over the course of 21 days, from the time the sun set to the time it rose. After it wrapped, the crew had t-shirts made that read, "I survived scene 118, which was the name of the scene during shooting. The cast and crew jokingly called it the longest night in horror movie history. At the beginning of the film, at about the 12-minute mark before stepping into the house, Drew Barrymore's father tells the mother, "Go to the Mackenzies' house for help," which is the same line that Jamie Lee Curtis tells to Lindsay and Tommy, the little kids in Halloween, which is one of the movie's many horror movie references. The use of the futuristic feature caller ID increased by threefold after the release of this movie. Thank you all so much for tuning in to another episode of the Tape Tomb. I've been your blue beanied host with the most, Larry Downs. And if you've liked this week's episode, make sure you click that like and subscribe button down below, and don't forget to ring that bell to keep up with future episodes. Tune in every other week for our sister series, Airlock Shock, starring Nick Haskin. He talks about some of his favorite sci-fi movies the same way we do horror here at the Tape Tomb. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Signing off, this is Larry Downs. Stay spooky, my friends, and we will see you in the sequel.